Good afternoon and welcome to the Screen South Digital Hub here in Folkestone. We're delighted to be working with our Accentuate team to present this 360 in VR seminar this afternoon. Actually, it's more than a seminar. You're in for a real treat because we've got a fantastic set of experts here. I just wanted to say we are based here in Folkestone. We've got a live audience who are willing the online audience along to take part too. We are based at the Glassworks here in Folkestone. We've got a studio, we've got lots of kit and resources. So if you are inspired by this afternoon session, please come down and say hello. We're very happy to pick up any ideas or thoughts or questions you might have afterwards so you can get some practical experience here. Have a good afternoon and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jo. Welcome everybody. My name is Esther Fox. I'm the head of Screen South Accentuate Programme. I'm going to do a short visual description. So I have kind of blondie, silvery shoulder length hair. I'm wearing black and red trousers and a black polo neck jumper. And I'm going to do a visual description of the room that we're in as well. So as Jo said, we're in the hub, which is a digital space. But to my right is our panel of 4 speakers who we're going to be hearing from later. And behind me is a screen with our logos, and we also have 2 banners. So I'm just going to do a little bit of information about access. So if you can please keep your cameras and microphones on mute, unless you're a BSL user and then you want to communicate with the BSL interpreters. In that case, please leave your cameras on. If you need the captions, they're in the menu bar at the bottom of the screen. So click on more and enable the captions. And we are recording this live stream. So it will be available on our website, on our resources page shortly. So a little bit more about me and the project. So as I said, I'm the head of the Accentuate Programme. We've been operating for about 16 years. And we work with deaf, disabled and neurodivergent people in the cultural sector to deliver projects that break new ground. Our most recent projects are Curating for Change and Curating Visibility, which are work placement programmes for deaf, disabled and neurodivergent people who want to make a career in the museum sector and particularly are interested in exploring the collections and bringing new stories to life. And as part of this process, we've been using digital tools to really enliven those collections and widen access. So central to our ethos is a belief that deaf, disabled and neurodivergent people bring fresh and dynamic perspectives which encourage new ways of doing things, which ultimately drives innovation. So this panel will not only discuss some real-world digital experiences that we've developed through this programme, including 5 sets of 360 experiences, which were based on experiences at our 5 partner museums, as well as a VR piece that was based at Dover Museum, and we'll be hearing from Karl and Simon particularly talk about that. These discussions will be situated with the acknowledgement of access as friction, constraints of time and budgets, and the responsibilities of museums to make reasonable adjustments to ensure disabled people are better served. So we'll hear from our speakers today, but we're also going to allow for about 20 minutes for questions. So if you'd like to ask questions, please do use the chat function, and then the questions will be put to the panel. So the panel is going to take place in 2 parts. The first exploring wider questions of why it is important to create accessible digital experiences with disabled co-producers and researchers. During this section, we'll hear from Manuel Vason, who designed our 360 experiences, and Harsha Balasubramanian, who is a consultant with us on the VR work. The second will be a conversation between Karl Mercer, our fellow at Dover Museum, and Simon Wilkinson from BRiGHTBLACK, who will describe how they work together to make VR experience which is accessible to blind and visually impaired users. Each speaker will introduce themselves and situate themselves. there will also be inevitably some crossover between speakers. So I'm delighted to welcome Harsha.
Hi there, Esther. And hello to everyone in the room and everyone online. My name is Harsha. I'm a blind South Asian female presenting person with dark curly hair. I'm reading my notes in Braille on this tablet-style computer called a Braille note. For the last 6 years, I've been researching and consulting with those who are devising access to virtual reality, or VR, within the arts and heritage sector, most recently completing a PhD on this research at UCL. This is how I crossed paths with the team and curatorial fellows at Accentuate and Screen South. For some context, VR, as far as I understand it, refers to 3D computer-generated environments which may be interacted with through a head-mounted display, which may also be known as a VR headset, and handheld controllers. Spatialized audio, haptic stimuli, and movement tracking may be used to enhance sensorial immersion. Museums are adopting more immersive, interactive technologies like VR, and I have had the privilege of working on multiple projects, including with Karl on At the End of History exhibition, which we'll be hearing about later. During these collaborations, I have realized that my role is not just about driving forward accessible and inclusive outputs in museums. Indeed, my role also involves exposing and tackling the various exclusions beyond visitor experience that may be sustaining ableism in museums. For example, as a member of the project team, I invite my collaborators to describe everything from the images that we work with to the ways in which the objects are displayed and the gallery spaces in which they are hung. I contribute to the dialogue often with my own prompts and accounts of what I am experiencing. Firstly, these exchanges disorientate our workflows, which may still center visual modalities such as images and videos. Especially in a VR project, my practice is a reminder that no matter how accessible we make the final product, the tools remain exclusionary and indeed in need of critical innovation. Secondly, the act or indeed process of description requires all team members to explore our preconceptions about an object or our visitors, enabling the critical reflection that is necessary for real change.
Thank you so much, Harsha. I've actually got a question for you, if that's okay. So, in what ways would you like museums to think about embedding access for blind or partially blind audiences in their digital offers?
Yeah, wow, this is a really good question and a really a timely one. I think I'd say there are two things that I would bring to that question. I think the first thing is to design products that don't intend or try to separate between your users. So what I mean by that is, don't have a different offering for blind people, say, or a different offering for deaf people, but have an offering, a piece of, a digital product that allows your visitors to customize their own experience, where flexibility is built in and the real beauty of the digital is that it does allow for these sorts of customizable experience. And briefly, if I may add, another thing I think I've really learned has been useful is when we remember that these digital interventions are often still embedded in physical bricks and mortar and in locations that people need to get to. So I think as long as people remember while they're building these wonderful digital interventions, that we still remember to have, good front of house training, or a lift with announcements and things like that. I just want to make sure that those things aren't forgotten.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really crucial, isn't it? And I think that leads very nicely, actually, perfectly put, Harsha, so well done, to Manuel, because I think there's something there about this sort of real world experience and then the virtual world experience, because actually what we were talking about with the VR was very much you needed to be in that space with the headset on and in the museum. But in terms of the 360 tours, part of the reason we were doing those was so that people could access those from wherever they were without the buildings kind of posing any access barriers. So without further ado, Manuel, can I hand over to you, please?
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So my name is Manuel Vason. I'm a white man on my early 50s. With short grey silvery hair, and I'm wearing a grey jumper today. So I feel generally more comfortable behind the camera than in front, and I have quite a lot that I want to say in a very short amount of time. So I hope you don't mind if I here and then look at a text that I prepared for the event. So I co-direct Studio Radar, a company specialized in the promotion and documentation of contemporary art. I'm also an artist, and my work explores memory as a form of intelligence we share with other human and modern human beings. The relationship between presence, representation, and the recollection has been central to my practice since the beginning. More recently, with digitalization and virtual reality, I've become interested in how simulated environments can host new encounters and spaces where different forms of presence can emerge. As an artist, I have often been concerned with how my event and exhibition have been recorded, and at times I've been very frustrated with the result that I receive at the end. And this led me to think of recording not as a neutral documentation, but as an act of translation and interpretation. For this reason, I believe it should be approached as an artistic process, one that requires sensitiveness, playfulness, and experimentation. In this context, I see the 360 virtual tours as a great tool full of potentials. They function as containers for different kind of information. They allowed immersive navigation with continuous global access. And they include interactive hotspots through which audiences can encounter artworks in multiple ways, as detailed image, as 3D model, by listening to the sound, reading or watching curatorial descriptions. They also function as dynamic archives, since they can be updated and reshaped over the time. And of course, nothing replaces the real experience, the physical encounter with the gallery. But having said this, the 360 virtual tours have helped me to rethink accessibility, not simply as inclusion within an existing system, but as a reconfiguration of the relationship that structure the experience itself. In particular, through my experience with Accentuate UK, I've came to see how creating 360 virtual tours with disabled artists can fundamentally challenge my idea of the encounter of a museum, not as something fixed, primarily visual, but as an experience to be shaped. In dialogue with individual and diverse life experience, with individuals with diverse lived experiences and access needs, I was encouraged to design a customizable interface with features like ambisonic audio, ambisonic sound, audio description, sign language interpretation, and text read by real voices. This allows users to tailor their experience to their needs. The encounter with the artwork, so, is no longer a passive acting or viewing, but something shaped by different bodies, abilities, access needs, and way of perceiving. In this sense, the goal is not to deliver a single authoritative interpretation, but to create conditions where multiple partial and co-created meanings can emerge. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manuel. I think, are we still all right for time? Be great. So I'm going to ask you a question, Manuel, if that's okay.
Sure.
So embedding creative access can be quite difficult. Is trying and failing an important part of the process to help push things beyond just basic requirements?
Definitely yes, for my personal experience. I mean, failure is something that I'd embrace since the beginning, and at the same time, also embracing the fact that there is no such idea as a perfect, completed output. Is an ongoing research, and testing is a real part of it. So I spend a lot of time in designing specific tools, and then when they're being tested, I actually realized that I had a lot of expectations, and they need to be changed or amended or even redesigned. So I think it's about, in my personal experience, like reconfigure also what does it mean failing. Failing is a creative tool, and it's not something that should demoralize, but it's something that you need to face, and it should encourage you to always search for different directions and be really attentive of the feedback. So in my case, it's been probably the most creative kind of tools that I put in place to reach where we are.
Great. No, I think that's the thing that we were sort of wanting people to be encouraged by as well, wasn't it? That actually part of the process is about trying things, and trying new things may well fail, or but if you don't try, then you'll kind of never know what you can reach. So
yeah. Absolutely, and don't place that kind of target of perfection that is actually really reductive.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you to Harsha and Manuel. We will come back, I'm sure, with further questions from anybody in the audience, so do keep them on the chat if you're interested, and obviously people in the room with us as well if you've got questions. But I'm now going to move over to Karl, who was our fabulous fellow at Dover Museum, and we're just going to sort of have a slightly more open conversation, I think. But I was just going to pose the first sort of question to you, which was, what do you think the benefits are for museums in embracing digital technologies to engage with audiences?
Great question. So yeah, hi, I'm Karl Mercer. As Esther said, I was the curatorial fellow over at Dover Museum. I'll give a visual description. I'm a white male in my unfortunately late 30s with long dark hair and a ponytail, and I'm wearing a white striped shirt with a blue waistcoat. And I was the curator, I suppose, concept designer for At the End of History, the exhibition at Dover. I mean, for me, you know, I have had a huge passion for the kind of accessibility and the opportunity presented by digital technologies within museums. We've already had such wonderful discussions today as a group, and one of the things that came up is the thing I'm hugely passionate about, which is the opportunities that are presented not just for accessibility, but for broadening the experiential reach of what a museum can do. I think just last week we had wonderful research that came out that showed Natural History Museum had 7.1 million visitors last year, and it's doing great, and most museums aren't doing that. Natural History Museum has this incredible space. It's huge, it has a garden, and that's how they're getting people in. How can smaller museums create those gardens? How can they sort of create an area in which they can grow and increase that audience? And I think online digital technologies, you can embed that accessibility and you can reach an international audience. When you take a museum like Dover's, for example, I can see my wonderful representatives from Dover Museum today. Dover has massive international connections. It is the cross-channel hub. It has connections to military veterans from the United States, Canada, Poland, New Zealand, Australia. Channel swimming is a massive international thing that everyone from around the world can participate in. How do you reach those audiences when you are purely focused on the bricks and mortar offering, when sort of stakeholders are mainly focused on getting feet through the door? I think there is a huge opportunity cost to not investing in your digital ecosystem and infrastructure. As well as putting together the exhibition that we did, while I was there, we were able to sort of improve the online offering, set up the web page with all the accessibility information, and provide sort of greater social media outreach that just improves the way that people can know about and access Dover's history.
Argument for using more digital, I think.
I'm very passionate about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if we hand over to Simon now to maybe talk a little bit more about some of the detail of the VR work. So you explored various tools which utilise both haptics and audio description. But how might access friction contribute to methods for negotiation and support different needs?
Okay, I'll describe myself first. So I'm Simon. I am a white man in my 50s with pink glasses, a green shirt and bleach blonde hair and a beard. And I see all of these questions that we're talking about here relating to one big thing. So if we look at the last 20 years, there's been a big change with audiences across the board. So what we've seen, so I'm an artist, so in the kind of venues that I show work in generally, there has been a reducing amount of people going and a narrowing demographic, okay? And meanwhile, when we look at broader media trends, we see that people are moving into different areas. And that is an access issue as well. So 20 years ago, we started making VR. And we started making VR because we could see that it would bring audiences in that were being excluded from venues. When we get commissioned, like when we're working with you guys, we are commissioned by you guys, but we're working for an audience, okay? And there's an inherent tension there a lot of the time, often to do with money, but other things as well. And when we look at that audience, we want to make something that's going to hold their attention and be really compelling and have them fixated and enjoying themselves and leaving with some questions and some thoughts. And so obviously everybody has to be on board all the way through. Part of that is really good design. So part of bringing more audiences in is using game system design. So when we make VR, we use game system design. That, I have ADHD, I can tell you, good game system design holds my attention in a way that maybe non-interactive media doesn't. When it comes to the broader audience, we want to make sure that everybody understands what's happening all the way through. Now, what we can't do is bolt that on at the end, which is what traditionally happened with access provision, right? And it's a problem for everybody if we do that, because then, when we're making a work like this, we're actually making a world, like a really compelling world that's going to hold your attention. So if we're making like a sci-fi world like we are, and then we just stick subtitles on the end that aren't in-world, it's really problematic. It's bad design, and it's going to throw everybody off, let alone the people who need that access. So we come at it as thinking about everybody who's going to be involved in this, including people who have visual impairments, including people who are neurodivergent. Let's make sure our design all the way through works for everybody. Now that has some tension in it, and that's where we're talking about. So we were, and one other tension I want to mention is money. So years and years ago, I started in the early 2000s, I started a disability film festival. And we had one person who came to the first festival that needed audio description. And we didn't have it. So in the second year, we looked into getting it. We had a budget for the whole festival of 40,000, and we were quoted 20,000 for audio description. So what we did is we used new technologies at the time. We used the surround sound channels on a DVD to put the audio description on there, and found a way of hacking the system to do it for 1,500. What we did on this project, in order to be able to accommodate within a budget that wasn't massive, that we could use haptics and sound to include more people, is we used AI to build a piece of software. That piece of software took us about an hour to make. That automated the subtitling. And that meant that we then had the latitude to spend enough time to play with haptics and sound and really test it. So we had Harsha come a couple of times and run tests on it. Some things worked, some things didn't. We had other people who came. And one of the things I noticed, there's another tension, and that's that even within those people who need the access, everybody's different, you know, in terms of how they can use their hands and so on. So we need to accommodate all those people. For us, technology is a big help with that. And in this particular case, AI was a massive help, because it meant that we could be much more fluid in trying things and changing things. So we tried a number of things with vibrations in hand controllers, and we were able to change those things really, really quickly when they didn't work, or when they weren't working 100%, let's say. So that's kind of where we're coming from in this piece, yeah.
And I think that's what we've been so excited about as well, is that, you know, the access features were all embedded from the outset, and they really were part of that creative process, because that's what we're trying to sort of express as a way of working, and you end up with sort of much better results. As you say, it felt like nothing was an add-on or kind of didn't sort of fit with the world sort of theme. I'm just thinking, Karl, would you like to maybe sort of describe a little bit of what happens in the VR experience for people that maybe have not played it?
So for anyone watching, there is a slide on the screen showing what people colloquially call Bill Stein's underpants. Within a frame, you are on a boat in front of the White Cliffs of Dover. In the area approximately where your lap would be, there is a tray of keys that a lovely fish loves to jump up and mess up. And you have to use those keys to open the boxes that are in front of you as well, and they reveal the story that pops up in a picture frame and sort of talks through the objects and stories in the collection that, you know, I and my co-curators researched. You know, talking about sort of the embedded access features, one of the things I'm particularly proud of is writing that script and embedding audio description within the script to make it, you know, more of a creative highlight than that bolt-on, you know, aspect that Simon was talking about. But yeah, you're a smuggler sort of carrying these objects in a near future where culture wars got real, and you know, the only kind of objects that were still left behind were the disability objects, kind of reflecting how disability objects are treated within museum collections as sort of not necessarily described or explored in that way.
Yeah, brilliant. And I thought the audio description was so strong because it drove the narrative for the whole work, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of that concept of disability gain that's getting talked about a lot. One of the proudest moments was a non-disabled person just going, "I love the script, it's so poetic." Like, I know I've achieved my goal then, that, you know, visually impaired people are very happy, you know, to have that incorporated, but it's adding to the experience of non-disabled people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we've got a bit of more time, I'm wondering, Harsha, would you like to sort of comment a little bit? Because obviously you were quite involved in testing that. And how did you feel the audio description worked for you? And also maybe the haptics that were involved, how did that help for you in terms of kind of getting a meaningful experience from the game?
Yeah, I would like to second the points that have already been made about the beauty of integrating audio description, because from a point of view of a user, it means that you're not requesting it especially for you, you're for yourself. It takes the pressure off you as a user. But in terms of haptics and spatial sound, I think, and the audio description, I think what worked particularly well for me is how they worked together, how these elements, you know, it wasn't just the haptics that was enabling my access or just the spatial sound. It was the ways in which they were supportive of each other, and how I think there's this particular sort of yes moment for me when I heard the keys in front of me through spatialized sound, where I could track the sound to the object, and then I used the handheld controller to click and sort of catch the key as it were, and it was reinforced by both an auditory cue, a click, and my handheld controller vibrated, and I was like, yes, I got it. And I think that sort of thing where I think the access features work together is really important.
Absolutely. And I think we remembered that moment. I think Karl remembered that moment when Harsha was sort of. How did you feel about that?
I welled up. So, you know, the first question people ask me when I talk about this experience is why? Like, why do a VR headset experience for visually impaired people? And it's a difficult question to answer because it might just be arrogance. You know, it's a why not situation. It's something that's not been done, and I thought that's exactly what this project is about. And you know, working with Simon, who's kind of a developer who really got it. That we are trying to achieve something where, you know, I think we did a really good job as a team of demonstrating the greatest barrier is actually just creativity. It's putting your heads together and coming up with a solution. In sort of digital and tech, there's often a race for the add-on, the bolt-on, what can we add extra, what more do we need? So yeah, once we finally achieved that and we're in the testing with Harsha, and she exclaimed out loud like, yes! And I nearly cried because, you know, I knew we'd achieved something absolutely fantastic that no one, as far as we're aware, had done before.
And Simon, I think I remember you saying at one point as well that it also made you sort of play in a different way, because at one point you were, I think, just closing your eyes and then thinking about the haptics in particular. So I'm wondering, has that sort of had some sort of impact on the way that you're now designing and making as well?
I think the thing to kind of impress in relation to that question is that with virtual reality, it's not, so cinema's been around for a long time, right? So when we're making films and we're doing access provision, there's a lot of, we know what we're doing. With VR in general, we don't know what we're doing. We always say if someone says they're an expert in VR, they're either lying to themselves or to you, because we're still working it out. And so, yeah, when it came to the initial designs, first of all, of course, for me to try and imagine what this means meant that I had to play it without seeing it and feel it. I'm not saying that means I understand it, but it got me closer, and then we did the testing. But the testing was the really important thing. And I think what I remember is when you completed the game for the first time, and I was like, yes. But yeah, this is part of the tension. You know, you're making these works for people, and most of them aren't like you. So there's a lot of, and it's an experimental, hacky medium. So it just is something that requires creativity, and you don't just open a book and learn how to make it, if you see what I mean. That's why it's kind of fun that we were doing it, I think. Yeah.
And I think a reflection from me as well is that we still haven't got it right for everyone either. And I think in both the 360s and the VR, you know, there's still so much more development to do. So we're certainly not positioning ourselves as experts of knowing how to do all of this. Particularly, I think, for deaf players, I think we could do some more work around that. But I do think the focus this time was to really think about how we were looking at that sort of target audience of blind and visually impaired players. But I know, Manuel, you're also still sort of thinking about the sort of future of how the 360s can be developed more as well. Have we got a little bit longer? Okay, we've got a little bit longer. So if you have any thoughts about how you might like to develop the 360s too?
Oh yes. I mean, one of the things definitely I would like to spend more research around is keyboard navigation. There are developers out there which they manage to be able to instruct the interface to not only navigate around the 360 space, but also command the hotspots, stop, increase the audio, all by playing two keys, Y, X. And I think that requires quite a lot of scripting on the back end or coding on the back end. But the it's there. It's really a matter of research time, a little bit of budget to be able to translate the coding within the software that I'm playing with, and testing and continue testing. Obviously, we're talking about haptic, and that is really about hardware as well. So imagine if you are possibly opening up interaction through the voice, or by tapping into an object, or by feeling certain element of the object by wearing a special glove. And other things that I feel really, really keen on, an aspect of developing, is the idea of be able to curate these 360 environments with a person that can actually see where you are and from around the world connect with you and give you instruction live. So there is another feature that is possible. So assisted digital curatorial tool, which again is something that in my mind is there. The potential is clear. I just need to make the coding available. So yeah, a lot of potential.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't there? There's still so much more we can be doing and so much more we can be exploring. So this is just the start of the conversation, I think. So I think that's probably about time to draw our panel to a close, but now we're ready to open up to other questions. So do we have any questions in the chat? Not at the moment. Do we have any questions in the room? Yeah.
Something Harsha mentioned about how often previous accessible experiences might have seemed like a add-on and were in essence a bit exclusionary because you have to ask for it, or it's like a whole separate experience. And then connecting to what Karl said about non-disabled people experiencing this installation and also having an enhanced experience themselves. How do you think in the future perhaps you can sort of bridge the gap between disabled experiences and non-disabled experiences? And because in my view, Access is a lot about community and participation. So whereas this was, as far as I understand, like a single player experience, how might we bring the community participation into future accessible experiences? I don't know, like it's a bit of a broad thing, but like something I was thinking about.
I think that's a really good question, something around, you know, how multiple people can take part in these, because VR can sometimes be a bit of a one person type experience. Would anybody like to kind of pick up on that question? Yeah, Simon, and then maybe Harsha? Yeah.
One of the things that's really interesting about audiences in the last 20 years is they are generational. So every generation has different habits. And what we're seeing coming along, so the guys who are all like 12 to 16 now, we like to imagine, if you don't play video games, you like to imagine people are sitting on their own in a bedroom and they're in a dark room and they're lonely. But that's absolutely not. The most sociable people on the planet right now are the ones who are sitting playing video games together in huge groups. The biggest community on the planet, I think, is, I can't remember, it might be World of Warcraft. And what we need to do, the reason we're paying attention to what these trends are generationally is because we need to make work for them in 5 years' time. So your question is really, really poignant. VR's weakness, there's a number of weaknesses with VR. For home use, it's too expensive for most people, and it's very exclusive. And the problem for most venues with VR, even 15 years ago, was that it's expensive to make something where you have one person every 15 minutes. So it may not be headsets, is not necessarily the answer, but these multiplayer experiences where people can all be together, the technologies already all exist. And so I think what we're probably going to see is more of that coming into museum spaces and into art spaces, so that I'm generally in art spaces. But as an example, I've just made another piece for a museum in the Lake District, which is a massive arcade machine that can be played by multiple people all at the same time. So we're already thinking about how do we make things for multiple people, because we know that's where, in 5 years' time, that's going to be really important. But also, how do we make that accessible? And so there are people, like, we're thinking about that. This piece we just made had to be accessible for, you know, if a 5-year-old's playing with a 90-year-old, or if somebody has a visual impairment or whatever, it has to be accessible for everybody at the same time. So it's your question is very good, is what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I think it's really nice for me to build on what you've just said there, Simon, because I think for me, in addition to thinking about the development of VR, I think we need to also think about how VR is promoted, right? How it's put out there. And what I'm finding is, like we were saying earlier, the playbook for VR in general is still being invented, including the accessibility features. And what we're finding, what I'm definitely seeing in the teams that I've worked with, is that there are a lot of lessons being borrowed and applied from theatre and from cinema. And a lot of those sort of art traditions have focused on compartmentalising access. So you would have a separate day for the audio description. You would have a separate day for the relaxed performance. You would have to request like an audio description headset at a cinema, for example. And I think what I would like to encourage the teams that I collaborate with going forward, and what I'd like to see in the industry, is that willingness to sort of reinvent the wheel and move away from the sort of compartmentalization of these accessibility features. And I think a part of that is sort of, for want of a better word, normalizing access, making it more everyday, in the sense that we have trailers that have audio description up front, whether you're expecting a visually impaired audience or not. You have trailers that have BSL or subtitles up front. You have access guides that include information about whether there are stairs. You know, you provide that information to all audiences, because trust me, there are lots of people who are going to want to know whether there are stairs or not. So I think that sort of information being out there, those access practices being implemented, makes those communities feel held, and will be useful for both non-disabled and disabled audiences as well, I think.
Absolutely, very well put, Harsha. Yeah, Karl, do.
So as part of, I mean, it's not just the VR, there is an additional exhibition part of it. So when I'm kind of designing that and putting that together, it was a case like we understood, you know, we are creating this very insular experience. We are creating an experience that, you know, someone has individually, but from a psychological perspective, I was approaching it, sort of cut my teeth in museums doing handling object exercises. And you notice the shift in psychology in a person once they get to interact with something. And so there is definitely an aspect of community participation that happens after the VR when they go back through the gallery. So having sort of delivered the VR and everything myself, I see how differently people interact with each other, and particularly where they've done their own individual experiences, they then kind of communicate and collaborate the individuality of that experience. So, I mean, I think in design we talked about that, the idea of making sure that people afterwards have the ability to kind of interact and discuss their experience and make it collaborative in that way, because we were aware, you know, very much of the insularity of a VR experience. But it's, yeah, great question.
Yes, we got some questions on the chat.
Yes, we have some wonderful questions here on the chat. We have 3 so far. The first one is from Sarah, who writes, I work for the Kent Downs National Landscape. Outside, we traditionally think of improving accessibility as removing gates, installing ramps, and improving surfaces. What are your thoughts on using this technology to help people explore the outdoors in a virtual way?
I mean, I'll start with that. I've worked on a project previously called Trail Tale, and they do sort of self-guided heritage walks around spaces. A lot of the time there was a focus on keeping those small local. I think, you know, there is enough beauty and enough history within sort of walks, areas of natural beauty. I mean, you know, I'm a biologist at heart. I went to uni to study science, so a rare flower, a particular environment, a couple of species. You know, you can really sort of highlight all of that in a virtual digital tour that can open up that space to, you know, people who might not be able to visit. And, you know, just looking at that broadly in terms of access, sort of in a broader sense, you know, there might be an area of beauty that you can't get to for affordability reasons, never mind, you know, physical or accessibility in that sense. You know, we can really open up the world. If you look at what people do with Google Earth, and, you know, even then when you gamify it with things like GeoGuessr, where you can have these incredible areas that people are playing, you know, guess where it is with. Anyone else want to answer?
The work that I've just completed, which is just launching on Thursday at Keswick Museum in the Lake District, is exactly that. So the brief was bringing the outside in. So the Lake District obviously has millions of visitors every year, but there are places which are difficult to get to for quite a lot of people, let alone if, say, for example, you're in a chair or whatever like that. So what we did was we well, it was really fun for me because it involved going into cave systems and flying drones and capturing textures and climbing mountains and taking photographs and then bringing it all together. Again, a lot of use of AI to make it all possible to be built in 2 months on a limited budget, and to make it all accessible. And what we end up with in the Lake District, there's a Victorian instrument that was built called a lithophone, which, to be quick about this, it's like a giant xylophone made out of slates that were tuned. And to play it itself, it's quite tall, so if you're a child or you're in a chair, it's quite difficult to access. So we took that and we put it into some places inside a cave system, so you play it with all the reverbs, you put it on an island that's very difficult to get to in the middle of water, and we put it into the mountains and so on and so forth like that. It's a very playful experience. It's not overly preachy about teaching you anything about the Lake District, but like a lot of video games, you learn stuff about it vicariously, and that's another access issue for us. It's like making it not boring, making it fun. So absolutely, that is, the brief there was bringing the outside in, which is, I think, exactly what your question was about.
Lovely. Have we got more questions? I think we'll move on then, if that's okay.
Yes, we have the next question here from Nick. They write, this is excellent work in terms of access in virtual tours. As a virtual tour developer, I have found it very difficult to find resources relating to this topic. What resources can I refer to? Also, I can see that the virtual tours were developed in 3D Vista, if I'm not mistaken. Why was this particular platform chosen, and were there any other platforms considered?
This is definitely directed to my field. There are very limited amount of informations and example references out there. I have chosen 3D Vista because they allow a lot of space for interactivity with the engineers behind the software. So they're not afraid of taking on board a project and passing it on to a group of developers and try to find solutions. So it's a kind of an open source, although is owned by a company. So we can all input. And in particular, when I was approached by Accentuate, I share and show my case study. And one of the things that makes me incredibly happy is that one of the tools that we created are now available for other people to use and implement in their own interfaces. So I recommend, because I'm using this, but I'm sure there are a lot of other platforms, and I think it's the forum, the real synergy of this platform.
Thank you, Manuel. Any other questions?
Yes, we have many questions coming in, and because we're a little bit short on time, we're going to pick maybe just one or two more. So the next question is more directed at Harsha. This is from Charlie. Hi, I'm currently working on a project exploring how VR reconstructions in heritage can represent autistic people's experiences as well as being accessible. To what extent do you feel that VR can balance both the accessibility and the representation of a disabled person's experience?
Sorry, could you repeat the last line of that question?
Of course. To what extent do you feel that VR can balance both the accessibility and representation of a disabled person's experience?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Charlie. I think the thing, again, I keep coming back to the fact that VR still requires innovation and exploration. And so in that sense, I think there's scope and there's invitation potentially for disabled artists to be able to get in there and be able to represent themselves and their perspectives. Again, I think disabled artists are up against the same barriers to entry sometimes that other artists are up against. So it's the affordability of the tools that are used to make VR, so things like game engines like Unity, which I think you can get sort of free licenses for. I'm looking at Simon, hoping to be corrected. But then if you want some sort of more advanced features, I think you do need to pay for them potentially. And I think so that sort of thing, training as well is potentially an issue. If you are someone like me who uses a screen reader, there's an issue because screen reader compatibility isn't a thing when it comes to engines like Unity. So I think there is still work to be done in terms of specific disability communities and making sure that the tools that are used to make VR are compatible with our existing assistive technologies. But I think there's once we're able to get in there, I think there's lots of scope for change.
Right, thank you. We've got 2 minutes, so we might be able to have one more question. Yeah.
Yes, we can go for the one from James. This is specifically for Karl. He has written, how would this technology help disabled people working in the heritage sector do their jobs more effectively?
That's a very interesting question. I think when you're looking at digital technologies in museums, there is very much a barrier to use as well as sort of the access barriers for the visitor. There are access barriers for staff as well. I think, the exploration that we're doing and the work that we're doing, so, curating visibility, curating for change before it was getting deaf, disabled and neurodivergent people working in museums. we are encountering these barriers, we are brushing up against this resistance as we're working, and also slowly figuring out and creating resources to kind of help people figure these things out. The technology we're developing ought not necessarily be looked at as solely for visitors. I know when we started, part of the concept design for me was trying to work with haptic technology to physically hold an object. And one of the reasons I wanted to pursue that was understanding how valuable that could be for sort of researchers, for academics, for people working in the sector with disabilities. There's a huge amount of work sort of going on behind the scenes relating to these projects that is also trying to improve that access for disabled people working in the sector.
Thank you. Well, I think that probably is all we've got time for now. So that just really leaves me to thank my amazing panel. I think you've all been brilliant today. Thank you for sharing so generously your expertise and your passion and enthusiasm for this subject. Thank you for our live audience. And thank you to all of you that have joined today. Really appreciate you signing in to see this conversation. And as I said, this is just the start of the conversation. So do keep in touch with us. Do look online on our website for this live stream when it goes live. It'll be on our resources page. Please do check out our 360s. If you go to our website, I'm not sure if they're in the chat, but I think they might be. So please do look at the 360 tours after this panel discussion. And those of us in the room, we're now going to have a play on the headsets and on the VR. So thanks again for joining, and thanks to our funders, Arts Council and Art Fund, for making this happen. Thank you.